Well, this is our fourth session together in studying tactics and defending the faith. And in the last session, we covered some very important things. Let's review them very quickly. First, we learned the third use of the Columbo tactic, and that is to exploit a weakness or a flaw in somebody's point of view by using questions. I encourage you to listen carefully to what's been said and to think especially about the answers to the second question. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? And then you see if there's a good fit there. See if there's a non sequitur or a misstep or a flaw or something like that, and then point out the error with a question rather than with a statement. Second, we learned 3 steps to improve your Columbo skill. I said first we should anticipate in advance what kind of things you might be running into and prepare in advance. I said, secondly, to reflect on your events, your interactions with people after they're over with. And I said, third, practice your questions and possible rejoinders with somebody else. Do a role play, basically, to get a leg up on that. Learn those things before you go out. Finally, we learned how to defend against the Columbo tactic when somebody's using it against you. I mean, if you feel you're being led down the primrose path by somebody with a bunch of questions, you can halt the process and say, I'd rather not answer a lot of questions right now, if that's okay. I mean, mostly I want to find out what you believe. So, and then now you regain control of the conversation. Do you mind if you tell me what you believe and what your reasons are for it? And then let me think about this. Now, in this session, we're going to work on a new tactic. It's called the suicide tactic. We're going to discover the nature of what are called self-refuting claims. We're going to learn how to recognize when somebody else's point of view self-destructs. We'll see how some very specific and very popular ideas commit suicide, and we're going to learn this time about how to respond to those things. And finally, we'll consider a unique variation of the suicide tactic that I call sibling rivalry. Now, the suicide tactic makes capital of the tendency of many erroneous points of view to self-destruct when given the opportunity. And that's going to make your job a lot easier because these arguments or these points of view, commonly known as self-refuting arguments, commit suicide all on their own. I mean, basically all you have to do is point out the problem and quietly watch while the person's view commits hara-kiri. That's the beauty of this tactic. It's easy once you see the problem. For example, consider this Peanuts cartoon. There's Charlie Brown sitting in his beanbag chair watching TV. Sally comes in and makes an announcement. She says, "No, that's my new philosophy. No. No matter what anybody says to me, my answer is always no." Charlie Brown, nonplussed, looks over his shoulder and says, "So that's your new philosophy, huh?" "Yes. I mean, no." "Oh, now you've ruined my new philosophy." By the way, did you notice how Sally's idea had within it the seeds of its own destruction? Here's another example. "My brother is an only child." Now, this is very obvious. This can't be true because the concept of brother entails the concept of siblings, right? How about this? "I cannot speak a word in English." Obviously self-refuting when spoken in English. "There are no sentences more than 5 words in length." This is a sentence that has more than what? 5 words. "You can't know anything for sure." This is a truth that skeptics seem to be pretty sure about, see? So these are problems. These are self-refuting notions. Look, every single statement is about something. The statement, "dogs have fleas," is about dogs. Now, sometimes the statement is about a class of things that the statement itself is in. The statement, "all English sentences are short," is a statement about all English sentences, including that one. So if I said all English sentences are only 3 words long, you can see that this English sentence that I've just spoken fails that particular test. It's self-refuting. Actually, it's worse than that. It can't possibly be true. It doesn't just happen to be wrong in this situation. Self-refuting claims can't possibly be true. And that's why I say that suicidal statements have within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. The minute you say them, they become false. Persons using such arguments, they can't recommend their own advice. They can't even get off the ground. Somebody says to you, "Well, you shouldn't make moral judgments." What is that? That's a what? That's a moral judgment. Their own statement disqualifies their statement. Now, I want to tell you why this suicide tactic works. It trades on a very fundamental rule of logic. It's called the law of non-contradiction. Now, some of you have not heard that term before, but that's okay because you use it all the time. Basically, this law states that two contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time. Formally, it's stated this way: A cannot be not A at the same time and in the same way. When the phrase uses the statement in the same way, it means something like this. If you said Napoleon was big and not big, that would be a contradiction unless you meant big in a different way in each phrase. If you meant Napoleon was big in history but not big in stature, you could see there's no contradiction there. That's why they say A cannot be non-A at the same time and in the same way. The problem of evil, by the way, is an attempt to use the law of non-contradiction, the suicide tactic, against Christians. The claim is that there is a contradiction in the Christian worldview, that God is loving and powerful, but there's also evil in the world. And the two seem to be at odds with each other, and that's how this argument goes forward. Now, I don't think it ultimately works, but you can see how people are using this concept to try to even argue against our point of view. It's used all the time. All suicidal views express contradictory concepts. In other words, they make two different claims that are at odds with each other. Now, these contradictions can be expressed this way: A is the case, A is not the case. They may be explicit or they may be implicit. They may be obvious or they may be subtle. Your job is to watch for them and then to exploit them. Now, explicit contradictions are usually very obvious. I never repeat a word. Never. Contradiction, I don't repeat a word, and I do repeat a word. You see the contradiction there, okay? There are no absolutes. Are you sure about that? Absolutely. Okay? Contradiction, there are no absolutes. There are absolutes. How about this one? You ever see this one? This page intentionally left blank. Not anymore. Contradiction, this page is blank, and this page is not blank. How about this? I used to believe in reincarnation, but that was in a former life. Contradiction, I don't believe in reincarnation. I do believe in reincarnation. I'll give you 3 good reasons why you can't use logic to find truth. You want to use logic to find truth? That's a contradiction. Now, implicit contradictions are often kind of hidden. And if you're not alert, you aren't going to see them. Okay? I never tell the truth. Now what? You see the problem there? Okay. Always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't go to yours. It's a Yogi Berra special. You figure it out. Ask me about my vow of silence. Now, sometimes suicide is very subtle. I had a caller once call me on the radio and said, I had been talking about word faith teachers. I think that's a serious problem in Christianity. And I was mentioning names. Paul mentioned names in the Bible, false teachers, so I was doing the same thing. Somebody called me on the radio, didn't like that. And here's what they said: you shouldn't be correcting other Christian teachers by name publicly on the radio. Of course, you see the problem there when you think about it for a moment. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to begin thinking about these things. My response to him was, Columbo question, exploits the problem, then why are you calling me on the radio to correct me publicly? You're doing the very thing that you're saying that I shouldn't be doing to you. How about this? You shouldn't force your morality on me. We already talked about this. Why not? Are you telling me it's wrong to say that other people are wrong? Look, a person who says this kind of thing about morality, and you hear this all the time, has got to state a moral rule in response to make sense of his objection, right? But the problem is, it's the same moral rule that disqualifies his point of view. He doesn't think that moral rules actually exist, but he is offering one to you, actually forcing one on you. It's like saying there are no moral rules. Here's one. I had a conversation with a guy once at a chiropractor's office. His name was Gil, and he was a really nice guy, not a Christian, and I had many times to talk with him, friendly conversations. But we got onto a topic of homosexuality. He got really upset at my moral point of view about that. He said, you Christians are very nice people, but pretty soon you start getting judgmental. Okay, are you beginning to see a problem setting up here for poor Gil? Well, I saw it immediately. I said, Gil, if judging is wrong, then why are you judging me right now? Oh, he'd never heard that before. He dropped back and he's rubbing his chin, and I can hear him mumbling. He's trying to regroup a little bit here, and he's saying, yeah, see, no, that's not going to work. All right. Yeah, I guess I was judging. I don't know any way to get around it. I guess it's okay to judge. But, he said, you can't push your view on other people. Once you push your view on other people, you cross the line. Now, he thought he'd bettered his lot. He'd just gone from the frying pan right into the fire, right? Because I had another question for him. He said, you shouldn't push your point of view on other people. I said, Gil, is that your moral point of view? He said, yes, it was. He didn't even see it coming. I said, then why are you what? Pushing it on me. He said, oh, yeah, that's right, okay. He's back here scratching his head. Made a couple of false starts. He can't get going. He gets all frustrated. Finally says, it's not fair. I said, what do you mean it's not fair? He said, I can't find a way to say it in which it sounds right. He thought I was playing a word trick on him. I said, Gil, it's not a trick. He said, you're doing the very thing you're telling me not to do. It's self-refuting his idea, committed suicide. Sometimes I get people at this point, and they say, now you've got me all confused. I said, no, you were confused when you started. You just now figured that out. Now, you might have noticed, by the way, that suicide and Columbo work very, very well together. As you pay attention to another person's viewpoint and you notice that their viewpoint commits suicide, well, use your Columbo tactic to point that out. Now, here's how to recognize if a point of view commits suicide. And again, this is a little bit more of an advanced technique. It's going to take a little practice. First, you've got to identify the basic premise, the main point that's underlying what a person is saying. You've got to look at their conviction or their claim. It may be implicit, not explicit. It's not always obvious, so try to identify it. The next thing is you want to think about whether or not the claim undermines itself. Does the statement satisfy its own requirements? Is there any internal contradiction? Can the idea be stated in the form of X is the case and X is not the case? If it can be, it commits suicide. Now, what I'd like you to do is a student interactive here and practice this just a little bit. I want you to break up in groups of 4 or 5 and work through the challenges that you find on page 65 of your workbook. These are the kind of common objections that you're going to face as you share your faith. I want you to take 7 or 8 minutes to work on them, and then when we come back, I'll go through them with you, okay? Go ahead and do that right now. Okay, that was fun, wasn't it? Let's go over some of these challenges together, okay? And I'm, again, going to briefly give you the backstory. If you don't follow my explanations right away, that's okay. They're all in the workbook, so you can go over them later at your own leisure. Okay, here's the first one. It's wrong to try to change other people's religious beliefs. I actually had a young lady tell me that her teacher told her that when she told her teacher that she was going to be a missionary in another country. Well, what is this statement itself but an attempt to do what? Change the Christians' religious beliefs, specifically about the Great Commission. In other words, if someone thinks it's wrong to change other people's religious beliefs, then they shouldn't be trying to change our religious beliefs about evangelism. Here's the contradiction. It's wrong to change people's religious beliefs. It's not wrong to change people's religious beliefs. Here's the second one you worked on. All religions are equally true and valid. This is religious pluralism, very, very popular in our culture today. But here's the problem with that. That's actually self-refuting. It commits suicide. Because if all religions are true, then Christianity is true. But part of the truth of Christianity is the idea that all religions are not true and valid. And therefore, this particular statement says that all religions are true and valid, and all religions are not true and valid at the very same time. There's a contradiction there. Now, some people don't see the contradictions. Sometimes they don't realize the problem, partly because they're not thinking through it, other times because they don't have the information. It just may be the case that they don't know that Christianity teaches that Jesus is the only way to salvation, even though he's mentioned it many times. And we have a little booklet at Stand to Reason that gives 100 verses that teaches that Jesus is the only way of salvation. And so it may be that you're just going to need to educate them a little bit on that particular point. You might need to educate some Christians on it as well. How about this one? You can only know what has been proven by science. A very popular statement. Commit suicide, but seeing it's a little bit harder. Now think about this for a moment. This statement makes a claim, right? The person who's making the claim thinks he knows the truth of the claim the statement is making, that you can only know truth that's proven by science. But how does he know this information? How does he know that all knowledge comes from science? Does his own statement satisfy his own requirement? In other words, does the scientific method itself prove that no other method is a proper method to gain information? Did science teach him this truth? No, it didn't at all. This view self-destructs because scientific proofs and experiments can't teach us that science is the only way to learn truth. Contradiction here, only science can teach us what we know, but since science doesn't even teach us that point, they also are affirming science doesn't teach us everything we know. If you commit suicide. By the way, if you can't know anything unless science tells you, you couldn't know what you had for breakfast today unless some scientist pumped your stomach and looked at it. If science is the only thing that tells us what we know, you don't even know your own thoughts. You'd have to have some scientist tell you what your thoughts are. But the only way he's going to tell you what your thoughts are is if he knows his thoughts about what your thoughts are, and he can't know his own thoughts until some other scientist tells him what his thoughts are, and you can see, the problem. Ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Here's one. There is no truth. This is a postmodern claim that ultimately denies that we can actually know anything about the real world. Now, postmodernism is a wave of thinking that has hit our culture, and it is kind of a community-based relativism. It's driven by the idea that all truth, all knowledge of reality is relative to somebody's linguistic community. That is, that there is no truth in the sense that we always think of the word truth, actual knowledge of the world as it really is. There are just all kinds of different accounts of the way the world is, dictated by the linguistic community. And in this sense, every community has their own truth, which truth is equally true for every community. Nobody's more true than others. The problem with this view is that the claim itself is a claim about the way the world really is. So they're saying you can't know any truths about the way the world really is, and you can. For example, this statement, because that claims to be a truth about the way the world really is. By the way, most postmodernists will not own up to the contradiction. They just don't want to go there with you. But this is clearly self-refuting. This actually worked out in a debate that I had on the issue of relativism. There is no truth. In fact, the title of the debate was called Is Truth True? And I was debating Professor Marv Meyer at Chapman University. And the resolve of the debate, I think, was, I was defending it, is objective truth exists and you can know it. And I played this card almost the whole debate, that this is contradictory. You say it's true. There is no truth, really. Is that true? That kind of shows the story there. I talked about the time I worked in Riverside as a carpenter and how the smog blows in the Los Angeles area from the west to the east, and all those poor sods in Riverside have to breathe all the stuff we create right here on the coast. And I was out there one summer breathing that stuff with a buddy of mine as we were carpenters, and then that smog was killing us. I mean, it was burning our eyes, and our throat was burning, we're coughing and sputtering. And finally, my buddy said, listen, I can't take this smog anymore. I got to go out back, take a break. I'm going to have a smoke. And the thing is, he didn't see the contradiction of his point of view. Now, when we got to the end of the debate, I mentioned to everybody that I got the last word in this debate, and I said, look, we're going to have a vote in a moment, and some of you are going to vote for me, and some will vote for Dr. Meyer, and I hope you do. I think he did a good job. But I want you to be aware of what you'll be saying when you mark your ballot for Professor Meyer. You will be saying that Professor Meyer convinced you that Mr. Kokel's view was false and Dr. Meyer's view was true. Right? And therefore, every vote for Dr. Meyer will be a vote for the resolve. Thank you very much. And everybody laughed because they got it like you did. A vote for Dr. Meyer is a vote for me. As it turned out, Dr. Meyer got one vote. Somebody wasn't listening, Two other people refused to check the box. They wrote a bunch of postmodern gobbledygook around the edges of the card. It isn't because I was a great debater. It's because this is an obvious problem when you say there is no truth. It is self-refuting. Now, what I want you to do is turn to page 67 in your workbooks where you're going to find an exercise called Stop the Suicide. I want you to break into teams of 4 or 5 and follow the instructions there. Go ahead. Let's take a few moments now and look at a variation of self-refuting statements that I call sibling rivalry suicide. Sometimes you'll notice that objections occur in pairs that are logically inconsistent with each other. This kind of puts them in a rivalry. There's a conflict there. Now, it doesn't mean that both objections are false, but usually it'll allow you to dispatch one of them and make your job easier. It also might help the other person to see that he's not thinking very carefully about this kind of thing. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. When I was in India, I ran into a fellow with Ravi Zacharias International Ministry. His name was Prakash, and he told me of a conversation that he had with a Hindu man. And this Hindu man held inconsistent views. You'll see it as it comes out in the conversation. The Hindu asked Prakash, my friend, "Is Gandhi in heaven?" Now, he added, heaven would be a very poor place if Gandhi wasn't there. And, of course, people really revere Gandhi in India. And said, and so my friend Prakash said, well, sir, you must believe in heaven then, and you've probably given some thought about what would qualify someone for heaven. So tell me, what kind of people go to heaven? So you can see the Columbo tactic being used there. Clarification question. The Hindu man said, well, good people go to heaven. This wasn't enough. My friend needed more information. He said, this idea of a good person, it's kind of unclear to me. What is good? The Hindu man said in typical Hindu fashion, well, good and bad are relative. There is no clear definition. Then my friend said, if that's true, that goodness is relative and can't be defined, how is it you assume that Gandhi is good and should be in heaven? Now you see the problem there. 2 points of view at odds with each other. A sibling rivalry. Either Gandhi is good and in heaven because there's an objective standard of good or evil, or morality is relative and there's no standard of good or evil, and you can't say that Gandhi is good. But you can't have it both ways. I ran into a law student when I was lecturing at USC once at their a legal society. And she was a young lady in the program, and she announced to me that she was an atheist animal rights activist. And I said, you're going to have a hard time making sense of that view. And she said, what do you mean? I believe that animals have a right not to suffer. And I countered with, and I believe I have a right to half of your income for my organization. Then I asked her, what's the difference between our two claims on your view? Given your atheistic presuppositions, what's the difference? The fact is, there is no difference. We had just plucked rights claims out of thin air. In her case, since she doesn't believe in God, she has no grounding for any transcendent rights. Rights are moral type claims anyway. You've got to have a grounding for this. And consistency for her required that she either believe in God and animal rights and human rights, or reject God and reject the idea that there are any kind of transcendent rights at all. As it was, her two views were in conflict, a sibling rivalry. So always be on the alert for arguments that self-destruct. You don't have to do all the work, friends. Sometimes the work is done for you. Keep your eyes open. Stay alert. See if a view destroys itself. Ask yourself the question, does that position carry with it the seeds of its own destruction? Give yourself some grace here. This takes time, but after a while, you'll get it. And when you discover that someone's view is self-refuting, then be sure to ask a question to exploit the problem. Columbo number 3. Let him sink his own ship. All right, what main points do we cover in this session? First, we learned the nature of self-refuting claims, that suicidal views express contradictory concepts, and therefore they are necessarily false. When I say necessarily false, I mean it's not possible for them to be true. In no possible world would such statements be true. Secondly, we learned a kind of a way to recognize self-refuting statements. First, we said pay attention to the basic premise or the claim that a person has, and then ask if the claim undermines itself. Does the statement satisfy its own requirements? Does it possess an internal contradiction? And then third, we examined a number of examples of popular ideas that fell victim to the suicide tactic, and we taught you how to respond to them. Finally, we learned to recognize the sibling rivalry suicide, that there are sometimes points of view that logically oppose each other and people are advancing both. And all we do is we show that they're contradictory and then let them choose which one they want to stand behind and therefore cut our task in half. Now, in the next session, we'll be talking about a new tactic called taking the roof off. It's a powerful tactic that demonstrates how certain views turn out to be completely untenable. In the meantime, homework again. First, I want you to work on your ambassador skills by using the suicide tactic. See if you can discover some self-refuting statements in things that you read or statements that you hear, conversations that you're having with other people. Second, I want you to take a few friends again and each one teach one. Teach them a little bit about the suicide tactic. Tell them what you learned and how it works. Go ahead and review the self-assessment exercise for this lesson so you're ready for the quiz on next week, and then skim over next week's lesson in the workbook to prepare for the next session. I will see you then.